Hello everybody, I'm Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and let's talk about Final Fantasy XIV and the negative sentiment I've seen go around ever since Dawntrail that has also resurfaced with 7.1. Now, I personally wasn't over the moon about 7.1, it was kind of what we expected because, well, there were no real surprises. It is what we expected. It was an aligned trade, new main story quest, new Unreal, we'll get a 24-man Totally Not Savage thing, which looks pretty cool. We got a new Extreme, and it's pretty much the Raiders patch, because we're also going to get an Ultimate. And if you don't do high-end group-based content in this game, well, there's just not that much for you. You'll probably end up doing the new dailies, check out the Align trade, do the main story, and then check out till 7.2. But the things that I did do with 7.1, I was more content with than I thought I would be. I enjoyed the main story quest more than I thought I would. And I am genuinely interested to see where this goes from here. Quite simply, more happened than I thought would. I've done the Aligned raid at this point now twice, and I enjoyed it way more on my second try than on my first try. I think it's a really solid Aligned raid. But you have a lot of negative sentiment going around the community. And I think the general vibe comes from a place I can understand. Because a lot of people, myself included, were disappointed with Dawntrail in terms of story. And Final Fantasy XIV is a game that focuses so much on its story, its storytelling, and its world. And when you have a significant chapter of that, which was 7.0, have a mixed reception, then the people who receive it negatively will be really disappointed. And while I did enjoy 7.1, I don't think it's going to drastically move the needle for anybody. It's continuing the story of Dawntrail as we thought it would, just in my opinion with better execution on the whole, though it's not without its flaws. And Final Fantasy XIV is a game that asks for a lot of investment and time from players. Like, just to be able to experience Dawntrail unless you buy a boost, chances are you're going to be dumping hundreds and hundreds of hours into this story, into this world, into these characters. And when people are disappointed in a late entry in a series that requires that much investment, it can sting way more than something that requires way less investment, for instance. Especially when you're just coming off the highs of Shadowbringers and Endwalker, and I would also argue Stormblood. Especially with the patches, mainly with the patches of Stormblood. Dawntrail, for a lot of it, just had a vibe that to me was rather off-putting, mainly with the Red Succession. And it's not the feel of a story or of a game that I went into Final Fantasy XIV or that I fell in love with Final Fantasy XIV for. And I think for quite a few people out there, they weren't able to really grab onto the Alexandria part, which I think does fall far more in line with at least what I love out of Final Fantasy XIV, because it's juxtaposed by something they genuinely dislike. And while the content in Dawntrail is actually rather good in my opinion, like I love the dungeon design, I love the raiding that I've done in Dawntrail, the fight design has been really good, there's a couple of key critical issues with Dawntrail and Final Fantasy XIV, its overall game state right now, that I think has led to this negative reception. I want to go into it, and why I don't think it's going to last forever. I think a lot of it's, funnily enough, on a ticking clock. And I think there's three main, pillars for, general discontentment throughout a lot of the community. The first one, obviously, is the story. It will always be the most important element of Final Fantasy XIV. But I think as elements from the Alexandria story have shown us, as well with 7.1, the story can still get dark and grim and tackle those existential themes about the human condition in an interesting way. Is it possible for the current direction of this 7.1 to 7.3 narrative, is it possible for it to just fall flat on its face? Absolutely. Could it be repetitious? Absolutely. Could it just be retreading what we already did with Elidibus back in Shadowbringers? Absolutely. That can happen. But they can also go in an interesting direction with it and take it in a new direction and do something cool and fun with it. And personally, I'm willing to hear them out depending upon where they go. But I don't think that Dawntrail did anything that bad, right? I don't like Wu Clamant that much. I'm not that big on the Tulialol stuff. But it's not like there was a moment in the story that assassinated a character or recontextualized a bunch of stuff from narratives in Final Fantasy XIV that I did hold in high regard and permanently recontextualized them and essentially poisoned the well. It didn't do that for me. It didn't have a moment like in, say, Halo 5, where you took a character like Cortana and, in my opinion, completely ruined her, thus recontextualizing all that came before. It's not like there was anything egregious egregious to me like that in Dawntrail. And I think if the storytelling continues to improve, continues to become more intriguing, more interesting, and goes back to the quality that it had been before Dawntrail, then I think over time, this negative assessment that a lot of people that are very vocal about it will start to fade away, or at least positive reception will overtake it. Now, there's another element. There's two more. That was a story. There's two more gameplay-oriented that I also think are on borrowed time, one more so than the other. And let's talk about the one that I think will be fixed and rather soon, and that is content. Yes, Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG, but you are foolish to think that most people actually raid in the game, or at least do so at a very high end. I think there's a lot of people out there that will treat 7.1 as they're gonna come in, do the Alliance raid, maybe they do it a couple of weeks to try and get some better gear, some glamour, or some equestrian roles of a minion or whatever. They're going to do the main story, they may do the new dailies, and that will be the content they consume for 7.1. Dawntrail, like all the other expansions for Final Fantasy XIV, was advertised with a lot more features, and those features just simply don't come till late in the patch cycle. Things like the new Bosja zone, things like cosmic exploration, or the new variant dungeon, or the new deep dungeon, or heck, the new limited job that'll come right at the butt end of the expansion. These are all pillars of content that people got excited for when it came to Dawntrail because it looked like the endgame offering of Dawntrail was arguably going to be the most fulfilling or interesting, at least to me, and to others, that Final Fantasy XIV had seen in a long time, but, well, we just haven't got any of that stuff yet. And that is par for the course when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV. It's actually one of the bigger design issues that I take issue with this game. Because you have, assuming we get some of that content in 7.2, you're waiting essentially 8 months from the beginning of the expansion, let alone the butt end of Endwalker, for all of these actual pillars of endgame. You know, that more mid-core content to really sink your teeth into and dump a bunch of hours into. We're not going to get that for a while, and we're still in that period of time where we don't have any of that stuff. So for a lot of people out there that just simply don't raid, they're left with the story that a lot of people were mixed on, or run the new Alliance raid once a week. Okay. But it's also not like that content's not going to come into the game at some point. And as those later patches start to come around, and people simply have more things to do in Dawntrail with new and exciting content. Again, so long as they stick the landing with that content, I think reception and overall perception of Final Fantasy XIV will continue to trend in a positive direction. And if the story that accompanies those patches is well received, then I think that expedites the process. Like, I've seen some negative perception to 7.1 in terms of the main story. Largely, at least to me, it feels like lingering resentment from 7.0 that hasn't completely gone away yet, because that's still fresh. I don't think 7.1 was perfect or anything like that, but I do think it was a massive step in the right direction. And if you pair that alongside more content, I think overall perception for Final Fantasy XIV will continue trending upwards. Now that third pillar, because this is a tricky one, job design. Okay, I play tank because I didn't enjoy DPS design in Endwalker or in Dawntrail for the most part. It wasn't fun to me, wasn't really intriguing. They've talked about reintroducing job identity and uniqueness into these jobs and moving away from homogenization, which is a direction I hope they go into. However, we're not likely to get that until, say, 8.0 at the earliest, and that is a long time to wait, and job design / class design in MMORPGs is arguably one of the most important elements to a game's success. And I do think Final Fantasy XIV, when it has good job design, is a really fun and enjoyable game to learn and immerse yourself in. But I think it is apparent for a lot of people out there that over the past few expansions, the game has moved in a direction of increased homogenization and over-reliance on the 2-minute window, and the continued pruning of uniqueness and identity in a lot of classes and jobs has left job design feeling stale and stagnant for a lot of people. One of the reasons I like playing tank now is because I feel that less with tanking, despite the fact that, yeah, there is a lot of homogenization when it comes to the tanks, but there's still that unique element that I like and cherish. Is it perfect? No. But they also recently made some changes to my least favorite tank, which was Dark Knight right now, currently in Dawntrail, that personally I am receptive to. And you may be going, Jmulls, doesn't that sound counterintuitive though? Because the changes Dark Knight received, like Dark Mind and Dark Missionary, also being given physical damage mitigation, doesn't that technically make it more homogeneous and more in line with the other tanks? And I think you can make that argument, but I would also say there's two kinds of job uniqueness. Job uniqueness that exists simply for job uniqueness, and then engaging and interesting job uniqueness. And I don't think Dark Knight's gimmick of doing what the other tanks did but in a more clunky or niche way was entertaining or fun. And I think of the pillars we've talked about before, this is the one, specifically job design, that I'm the least optimistic for in the future, at least with the remainder of Dawntrail, because it doesn't sound as if we're going to get the overall systemic changes in design direction before 8.0, which is still a long way out. And we don't even know what it'll look like in 8.0, if we'll even get all of it in 8.0. That's an element that I think will require consistent, constant, constructive feedback. And when it comes to job design, that can be a hard thing to do because there's a lot of people out there that just simply have different opinions. And like, whose voices do you listen to and whose do you not? Because if you try to please everybody, you'll end up pleasing nobody. Personally, I think it's important to have different playstyles for different jobs. I don't think it particularly breeds a healthy pool of classes and jobs if everyone is supposed to like every job or every class. Because chances are, unless you're just incredibly lucky, you won't love a single job all that much. You'll just be okay with a bunch. But I do think the story with 7.1 is an improvement to 7.0. I think it's going in a far better direction. I am intrigued. I am interested. I am engaged. I want to see what happens in 7.2. And the combat content I've played so far in Dawntrail, I've been highly receptive to and really enjoyed. And we're still due to get a lot of additional content in the patch cycle of Dawntrail. So I think over time, I think sentiment will trend more and more positive. I don't think it'll happen all at once. I just think it'll be in increments, more receptive, more positive, so long as they're able to stick the landings with all these things, which I think they're capable of. I think the game will, and people have pointed this out, right? That reception to Stormblood was kind of similar to this, but then with the patches, it got a whole bunch more content and the story improved and reception improved and improved and improved, and then we got Shadowbringers, right? Like, this has happened before. I'm not willing to throw away a whole bunch of goodwill and optimism that this game has earned from me over those expansions because of one thing I think was solidly okay at best, right? I've talked about toxic positivity before, but toxic negativity is a thing. It's important not to, like, blow something up out of proportion just because you're a little bit angry or a little bit upset. Measured, reasonable response, giving constructive feedback, not being afraid to give feedback, but also not being a dick about it. So where does this leave me with 7.1? Because as I believe I talked about at the top of the video, I want to enjoy Final Fantasy XIV. And there was something I was realizing over the last couple of days. And that was, okay, chances are I'm going to become far more engaged with Final Fantasy XIV as those future patches come online. As we get those new pieces of content, I'm going to want to engage with them. I'm going to want to play them. I'm going to want to sink a lot of hours into them. But I've not really put my character in a position to really benefit from it. I grinded a little bit at the beginning of Dawntrail, and then I just kind of left them. So here's what I want to do before 7.2 comes out. I've never been a real high-end raider, or anything like that when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV. I've only done a couple of extremes before in my tenure with Final Fantasy XIV. What I want to do is at least beat the extremes for Dawntrail in the game right now. That may not sound like much, but it is for me. I want to gear my character, I want to level up one of each of the roles so I can do all the role quests, I want to level up all my crafters and gatherers, I'm doing my dailies, I want to do all the crafter and gatherer turn-ins. I want to do all of that I did for Shadowbringers back in the day. So that's my personal goal for the next few months before 7.2. Get my character in that position for when all this new content really comes online, I can just dive in. Because I did talk about before, there's a difference between the perception of not having content and there actually being content to do. Because when you look at it objectively, there's a lot of things you can do in Final Fantasy XIV. It's just I think a lot of people's motivation to do that just isn't there. But for me, I know my motivation will be there, and when I realized that, it produced motivation for me now. So that's that's what I plan to do. And here's what I want you to do. Leave a comment down below with what your short-term goals in Final Fantasy XIV are. Are you still playing? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to get? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, hear your perspectives. And if you stop playing, tell me what would be the one thing that would bring you back in. Is it better class design? Are you just waiting for new content with one of the patches? Are you waiting for the story to improve or whatever? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.